You're listening to Tip That Scale, a podcast for folks who were laid off, bracing for one, or considering your options to avoid it happening to you. We're here to help you tip that scale in your favor. In this episode, AJ, Ron, and I are talking about the current landscape, what's happening with organizations, and a few reasons why we're seeing the layoffs in the numbers like we've been seeing them. AJ kicks off this episode by talking about investments, particularly investments organizations have received over the last several years and how those investments have played out, especially as it relates to headcount and layoffs.
It's the type of investments and the type of growth these companies experienced over the last year or two, right? When you're talking about organizations that are going through these mass layoffs, each and every one of them have gone through a stage of quote unquote hypergrowth, right? Essentially, investors came in, dumped a large sum of money, told organizations they needed to grow in order for them to get the things out in that amount of time, or their product out in a certain amount of time, but they didn't properly plan or structure their hiring needs in order for them to do that. And so the majority of the organizations that are going through these downturns or redundancies or whatever you want to call them are the ones that got heavy investments from 2017, 2018, 2019. And organizations are being told, okay, in order for you to do this, you're going to have to scale astronomically in order to get this done, right? It's no fault of the organization. It's just the environment that they were living through at that point in time. But if you notice, as soon as an organization or the market took a downturn and these investments were being pulled back, the organizations were no longer able to support the amount of people that they had, right? So, I mean, let's just take one of the largest organizations that were impacted by this. They took a 20% dive literally in a matter of a day. Less than actually 10 minutes, you saw towards the end of the trading day that it took a nosedive. The very next week is when conversations of 10% reductions, 15% reductions started occurring throughout the broader market. And it goes deeper into not just one organization and all these other companies that had their evaluations based on some of these organizations that were impacted. But then when they started being brought down, their bottom line started getting impacted. They just could no longer support the number of people that they had, right? And there are some private companies that kind of are going through the same type of thing. It's just because of the investment inflow is not coming in right now. Cost to borrow has gotten far more expensive. Literally just from a year ago, it was pennies to the dollar roughly a year ago. And this now you're looking at 7%, 7.5% interest rates. And these are all variable. They don't stay the same, right? And so when organizations are having to pay back this money, that's almost what, at this point, 7x, 700x times what they were originally paying, it becomes very volatile for them to support the number of people. It goes far deeper into it goes into microeconomics far more than most people realize. It's just everyone starts fixating on what crap had happened to me.
Right. Yeah.
It happened to 150,000 other people that were in the tech startup environment over the last year, and it's continuing to happen. The question is cool, it happened. What's next?
Yeah. Ron,
and that is a norm for that market, right? You've got, when interest rates are low, you've got investors who are willing to put money into those tech startups or mid-tech startups and wait for a longer period of time for return because they don't have better alternatives for their money to invest. I mean, the risk are worth the reward. When you get to the point of interest rates being raised like this, it's not as enticing, right? So they pull back and they don't invest. And like AJ was talking about, all these people that got hired to fulfill that need, they're no longer affordable. I mean, if you look at from a statistics standpoint, there's some of the numbers that I was reading. It talked about in November, the tech sector lost 52,711 jobs. for a total of the year, 80,978. And that's from Challenger, Gray, and Christmas, where that number came from. But yeah, those are huge, and that's a part of this. Now, that said, there's 20% of all IT jobs are still open out there, with massive migrations from corporate IT to IT tech providers. And I was reading something about that and said it doesn't see an end to that trend for the next 5+ years, right? Which, if we've all been in this long enough, we've seen that is kind of the stage that happens, right? You have a lot of these companies that quit hiring direct. They kind of wait out, see a little bit what's going to go on with the market. They hire IT contractors, whether it be, through agencies or direct, and test the waters, right? I mean, it saves them money from having to pay benefits and all that thing, and they know that they can cut them quicker that way if they have to. So I think that's what a lot of people in this sector will have to look to. I know a lot of the veterans have done it before and seen it and know the trend and know that's kind of the way it goes. But a lot of the new people will need to look at those options.
So,
well, not just veterans, but if you take a look at the organizations that have been around for 20, 30 years, right? Even if they're giant tech organizations, they've planned and prepared for this, and they've seen it. And if you look at, there's two out of the big five in the tech sector, right? There's still two that haven't even remotely even mentioned the thought of doing what's happening right now, right? Doesn't mean it's not on the cards, but they've planned pretty well for this, and they're continuing to plan for it. But it's literally the organizations that you've seen in the last, probably say 6 to 10 years since the last issue that we had with the market. Well, let's just say the Great Recession, right? Again, not trying to mention names or anything like that, but 2 out of the 5 are staying fairly stable because they haven't seen, or they did see growth, but they didn't see growth at the rate that some of the other 3 did, right? And now the 3 that did see that immense amount of growth are the ones that had the largest layoffs throughout the market right now, right? 10,000 here, 15,000 here, 8,000 there. And it's just steadily continued to go on throughout the rest of this year. What I do want to say is, even though we're going through this right now, you can either look at it one of 2 ways. You can look at it as a deterrent. You can look at it as a way of saying, oh crap, this is happening to me, and and just really not take advantage of this, but look at this as an opportunity, right? Everything happens for a reason. Maybe a skill that you should be developing, you didn't get a chance to develop while you were working your 9 to 5. Sometimes it's 9 to 9, sometimes it's 9 to 12. This happened to you for you to more or less take advantage of the current situation, right? What's happening right now is going to generate immense wealth for a lot of people if they understand how to take advantage of it. Not just from the job market standpoint, but what else can you do?
Yeah. And that tends to be, I mean, I would say we saw a lot of that at the height of the pandemic in 2020 as well, where it's, one of my favorite words during that time was pivot. And for those that don't know how to pivot, number one, I'm going to always say, get a coach, work with someone who can help you pivot and help you see a vision. But beyond that, there's always something that, from a skill standpoint, from talents that we have, that we can definitely leverage in downtime. And that downtime, we move it to, I would say we move it from the bench to a starter. I'm going using a sports analogy. Move it from the bench to a starter, and when we see just how much it works in our favor. I do have a question for you, because we're talking about right now, we're talking about the market, we're talking about industries, and I mean, both of you while you have a lot of experience in staffing and talent acquisition outside of technology, you primarily work of late with technology. So identifying, and we talk a lot about tech companies. What was the driver? You know, if you think, if I think in thinking about dominoes, and you have dominoes that are set up and you knock over the first one, and then you have the train. It can be it's a beautiful thing. It's a fun thing. I did it a lot when I was a kid just to keep myself busy. But what was the kind of that driver? The company, was it a technology company or a company based in tech that really started kind of started things along the way as far as venture capitalism, investment, hyper growth for hiring as well?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's a company.
Uh,
I would say it is a mindset, and it's FOMO. It's the fear of missing out.
mm-hmm.
Everybody's looking for the next Google. Everybody's looking for the next Amazon. Everybody's looking for the next big thing. And there was just an influx of cash being pushed around. Even sometimes if the investment didn't make sense, it was just, all right, we're going to throw money in and hopefully it works out. Right. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it's any one company because this was going on throughout the broader market. I mean,
Is this a Michael Douglas in Wall Street thing that says greed is good? Is this where it comes from? Should we?
I mean, but you can't really help the fact that it's human nature, right? It's like we saw how many people became extremely wealthy because they got in the early stages of Tesla, got in the early stages of Google, got in the early stages of, when Apple first went through its restructuring and transition, all of these things, it generated immense wealth for certain people. And now as people started getting older, they noticed that, hey, this is a real way to do it. And so then money just started getting inflowed into the market. And FOMO, 100%. It's not like you could clearly look into the market and there were organizations that are worth 80 billion, $90 billion evaluations, but they don't have a single product out yet. Right? How does that happen? It's the amount of money being pushed into these organizations that are throwing their valuation up without a steady revenue stream coming in that supports that evaluation.
Ron, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it's falling in line with what AJ's saying. It's kind of like, with our last big one, it was more on the mortgage side, right? That was your product whose valuations were just way out of control and above what they should have been, and the bubble eventually burst, and that's kind of where we are now. I mean, it falls in line with what he's talking about. That said, you've got all of these companies that did jump in and overhire and pay all these salaries and monies, and after that, you've got all these companies that were left out, right? That couldn't afford to do that or weren't as sexy as a job opportunity as that. And now, if you look at the numbers, those are a lot of the guys that are hiring and looking to take advantage of some of the layoffs in these big companies. So, if we talk about where do you look, that's one of the places to look. We kind of mentioned it on our last one, or those areas that couldn't, healthcare, pharma, government, state, local, government. I was reading an article this week and it talked about, and actually, I think this is from Gartner, that they predict the IT spend in 2023 will grow 5.1%. So, it may be, it's not all people, right? Some of that's the hardware and the technology itself, but it showed that the majority of that growth would be in security and risk management, followed by cloud migration, and then analytics, automation, and customer experience. So you were talking about pivoting earlier, Nicole. That's a pivot in and of itself for some people in technology, right? Look at the areas where the spend is going to happen. You don't necessarily have to get out of technology, but take this downtime to acquaint yourself more in those areas or gain some more knowledge or certifications, because I mean, we've seen it for years. Those are areas where there's been a glut of need and not enough people in them. So Go where the money's being spent. Position yourself there.
What about people outside of technology? So I know, and we've seen that, I think AJ, you mentioned it, that I always like to say, are you in a revenue generating position? And some of those are typically the first ones hit. I mean, that's what happened to me previously as well. And I would say one of the first ones, but aside from maybe a large human resources department, but another group that's often hit is marketing. And there are, other areas on, I would say, the corporate side outside of technology that that are that tend to experience a layoff, especially you can almost predict it. You see the signs. So when we're talking about, we've talked about a little bit about what folks with a technology background, what they can do to pivot. What would you suggest? I have some suggestions as well, but I'll go to both of you first. What would you suggest are some of those areas that, say, a person in marketing could pivot to?
I guess it depends on the type of marketing, right? Because marketing itself is a very loosely used term. Well, I mean, with every one of those roles. So, like, let's go back to the law of energy, right? It can be transferred and it could be changed, but it doesn't ever deplete, right? Similar to the market, just because one sector the money is being drawn out doesn't mean another sector isn't growing, because investors start looking at those sectors and saying, that's far more stable than what this was. They'll pull their funds out, put it towards what they think is going to at least keep it level, right? Mm-hmm. You can still stay in marketing and still do everything that you were doing for some of these other organizations. It may not be as pretty,
sexy.
Yeah.
That's so, yeah.
But there's still opportunities out there, right? What happened and what is happening right now has its good and bad ramifications, right? With the level of growth that the tech sector experienced, it gave a lot of people the experience they needed to work within those sectors, right? But also there's this hiccup right now, right? And there's just such a massive hiccup that everybody's just really confused on what their next step is going to be. Where should we pivot? Where should we go? The healthcare market, the government sector, other private organizations that are growing organically versus taking massive hits, right? And sometimes even going to those smaller companies is going to give you far more experience than being siloed in a much larger organization.
That's very true. That's very true.
So it depends on what your prerogative is and what you want to do in your next step or your next evolution, right? There was this quote that I saw over the weekend that essentially says that in order for you to develop something, there needs to be an occurrence. No matter how extreme, the more extreme it is, the bigger the development, right? And in order for you to push past your own boundaries, those experiences are required. This is one of those experiences.
That was a long quote.
That was a quote with commentating.
Yeah.
One of the things, and we'll definitely get into this in future episodes, just because we've done the research. But one of the things that I suggest to a lot of people is do your research. You have to do research. You can't just, I would say it like this, and I learned this through just kind of being in the recruitment marketing employer brand space for over 20 years. And I've seen the ebbs and flows. I've seen how we went from big full page ads in the newspaper to tiny ads online where you can easily look at it on your computer, desktop first. Then we moved to laptop. And now if wherever you are, you could be traveling to, your Aunt Susan's house across the country for Christmas, and you can be looking for jobs on your smartphone and applying. We have seen that that growth and that change over time. And with that, I think it's important that folks know that you have, as things grow and change, you actually have to adapt to the growth and change and be prepared, and not expect to do the same things the same way and get the same type of results that you did before. So if you applied and it was easy peasy back in let's say 2013, you applied maybe to 5 jobs, and out of those 5 you got 2 interviews, and out of those both of those interviews you were able to get offers from both of those companies. That's not necessarily happening the same way now. Sometimes we have to change and adapt, is what I'm saying.
So if you're not changing, you're not growing.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and in this market particularly, heading down the same path as you were talking about, Nicole. I mean, I've to date myself, I remember when I first got into the industry, people faxed in their resumes, right?
Yeah.
And if you're in the recruiting space, you're trying to be the first one at the fax machine to grab those and start evaluating going through it. So, and now there's so much about, and this falls a lot more in your wheelhouse, Nicole, of helping people to understand how to self-promote. And it's done via social media routes, right? And the LinkedIn and all these things. So it's so different. And I've had to learn to adapt to that more, especially going through this, right? The layoff. I mean, it's not something I see it every day, but haven't had to do. So you've got to find a way to get noticed. I mean, you look at these jobs that are popping. I mean, and it's the end of the year, right? People have kind of packed it in. Yeah. You're probably not going to see much until after the first of the year. But even then, if you see a job come out, there's a lot of them. There's 200 applicants immediately, right? So you got to find that differentiator. You got to think about how that recruiter, it's a diminished staff of recruiting, right? I mean, I was thinking about it earlier. You think about the evolution that we went through this year, even tons of jobs sitting out there. The recruiters have multiple jobs that they're working with, a lot of candidates applying. A lot of those are not qualified, but they're still applying, have to be reviewed. You've got them having the jobs that very few people apply to, that are looking for the purple squirrels, and those guys are spending time searching and looking and trying to find that person and reaching out to them and being ignored, and a very small hit percentage, right? So we're talking about efforts of recruiters at the beginning of the year versus now. And now you've got fewer recruiters because at most places they've diminished their recruiting staff. And what jobs that they do post, you're getting hundreds of people who are very qualified that are applying to these. So you got to think about, how am I going to get that recruiter to pick mine out of the pile? Or how am I going to, from a timing standpoint, get there first, get there last? What is the strategy, right?
Yeah.
So you got to reinvent for this whole process. This is an anomaly.
Absolutely. And you know what? Diminished staff in recruiting. And I know when I've been on LinkedIn and I've seen, and I remember this from a couple of years ago as well, people, as a candidate, it's disheartening. Number one, it's disheartening to me, but it also makes me a little angry, just to be honest. But it's disheartening when you apply to a position and you don't hear back. So there's that. But I think a lot of it is understanding. It's always understanding, right? And understanding how we have this expectation. And it does come down to expectations that, you have a good staff of recruiters, and maybe I'm only one of 10 people, or maybe only one of, say, 50 people. So you should be able to find me in that list of resumes. But when you're right, when you have a diminished staff of recruiters, it definitely is. And you think one recruiter going through, say, 200 plus resumes, and how much time, and then also things that candidates don't necessarily think about is what's happening internally. So there are processes and procedures and hiring managers knocking on your door. I need some resumes. I need candidates. So there's a lot of pressure on the recruiting side as well for recruiters. So it's always good. And I love that we're able to bridge that gap and give candidates an inside view as to what's happening internally within an organization, but also let organizations and remind organizations, recruiters, hiring managers, that they're dealing with people, and from my standpoint, in my wheelhouse, that's where the brand comes in. It's, both sides of it. If you just send, I had a company several years ago, after I applied for a position, I didn't hear from them for 362 days. Why do I know the actual days? Because I would keep track of the companies that I applied to. And a year later, I forgot granted, it's a large company, so I can't forget the name, but I forgot that I applied for the position. But what really, I would be honest, it wasn't disheartening. It made me angry as an employer branding person. Um, then they sent me the rejection email on that 362nd day. On the 363rd day, they sent me a request to complete a survey about the process. How easy was it for you to apply for the position? I have no idea. Are you kidding me? So I know, from a brand perspective, we have to think about this. We have to think about it, and we have to think about it from the standpoint of the organization and the organization's needs, but also how are we being viewed by the candidate that they may not know. So yeah, it's a lot
I want
to
I want
put
to
out
add
there.
on to
Uh-huh.
yeah. I mean, just as confused as everybody else is with what's going on right now, so are organizations. They're having to work with limited budgets. They're having to figure out who can take on more. They're having to figure out when they are looking to hire, what exactly are they hiring for, and they're having to be far more targeted than they have been in the last 7 years, right? Also, one of the things that we need to take into consideration is yes, TA was hit first. In a lot of organizations, TA, HR, those functions were systematically hit first. And what's left within these organizations are people that are far more cost effective, and generally that means people with far less experience than the people that were exiting. And I'm not saying this is everyone,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But the mass majority.
Mhm.
And when you're applying to these roles, I'll give an example, right? Just a few days ago, I had a discussion with a particular organization, and this was a lead recruiter that said that literally had like 4 years of experience.
Mhm.
In my world, when you're a lead, you've got anywhere from 7, 8 years of experience. You're capable of not only understanding what your function is, what other people's functions should be, and you're very knowledgeable in regards to your vertical, right? 4 years is still, I would probably say, you're midpoint, and you still have a lot to learn. But when you're asking me about a role that I had 14 years ago, honestly, I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
these types of processes, we have to understand that, hey, if this is the type of situation that we're in, how do we navigate that? Right? The likelihood of that person passing your qualifications on to the actual hiring manager or the person of that owns that role. One, you have to understand, is this person understanding what I'm telling them?
Mhm.
Right? And two, let's say you're a 15-year person coming in saying, hey, I could be a lead too. What exactly is happening to this 4-year person?
Right.
So not only are we having to look at the actual hiring need, but what's the psychology behind it?
Yeah. I share this with clients and friends all the time. So we know that an account executive can be a salesperson. It could be a marketing person within an agency. That particular title goes across a number of industries, a number of departments, a number of roles, a number of responsibilities. And so when we're talking about the experience of a recruiter and understanding that. So also, we can't always just leave it to the recruiter to just read our minds. So from a candidate perspective, we need to be very specific about what, not just what the title is, but what the role that it played. And there's always tips and tricks and ways to do that as well. But it's the same thing. Technical support, customer success, and customer service back in the day. So that can all fall into a certain role, but this is that disconnect between the candidate at one company or a person at one company versus leaving, going to another company, and it's really not apples to apples comparison, where there's title responsibility. So we all, I think on both sides, on the corporate side or on the organizational side, as well as the candidate side, we have to understand that those nuances of differences exist.
And with that, Nicole, I think that's why it's even more important for us and other candidates out there to be conscientious of that. You have to read that job description. You have to speak and tailor your resume in terms of that job description, right? Because as AJ was talking about, you may be talking to a four-year recruiter, which, I've worked with some great four-year recruiters, but still, that said, a lot of that terminology is not going to translate unless they've been to multiple companies. That it means the same thing, but it's a different name. So if you don't take responsibility for making your resume fit that, it may be lost on the review part by the recruiter, or if you get to the conversation with them, it may be lost there, right? If you're not speaking in the same terms. Most of the time, it never gets through the filter on the front end to get to that. So especially in this market, you're going to have 8 to 10 different resumes that tailor towards different job descriptions that you can put in. So I think we're all going to lose out if we don't do that. You have to do more. I know coming out of the road we just came out of, right? It used to be a trend. Before you took an interview, you would study the company and get to know something, at least something about what they do. And as things have evolved and there was plenty of jobs for everybody, that was lost, right? I would talk 90% of the candidates didn't know what the company did or anything about it. Didn't do any homework prior, right? And you learn to overlook it. But now I don't think you can get by with it. I think you have to do more research on your end, both from, like I said, marketing yourself, preparing your resume for it, and then preparing yourself for the interview and knowledge about the company and the role. Because the reality is you're competing against 200 to 300 people or more at everyone you submit to.
Well, not just that. Let's just say not just that, but let's just say you started researching an organization, and then you found out that maybe this isn't where you want to be.
Come on now, preach. Come talk to me. This is, y'all know, this is my area. It's employer brand, and I mean, keep going. Talk to me.
If we talk about that, right? Like, why is that role open? What happened? Did you just drop that role in December, and now you're trying to rehire in January? And why? And the other thing you need to find out is just how well is the organization doing right now? Is your role there only for the next 6 months to keep them operational? Or is your role there for the long haul? Similar to what I said in the last episode, what is the need? And how long is this need needed? Like, how long is it budgeted for? Like, these are some of the questions that you have to start asking. Did this organization just do a round of layoffs, or are they been kind of steady Eddie? Right?
To ask yourself, are you okay with that, right? If it is a 6-month need, hey, am I good with 6 months to get into the next year and see how things are? And that's fair and fine. But yeah, you're right. You have to be prepared for that, and it is good to know the why, which only research can generate. I mean, you can go and read Glassdoor or LinkedIn on any of these companies right now and find a treasure trove of information. Some of it may be biased, and you have to, it's like reading a product review, right? You have to kind of read between the lines.
Yeah.
Well, not just from a review standpoint or what, people could put out there, because let's face it, there's going to be a lot of negativity in regards to certain organizations and things like that, right? Just because of what happened. Is it warranted? Possibly. I don't know, right? I mean, every organization situation is different. But look and see how the organization is doing financially. There's a very easy way for you to understand, like there's a certain number that an organization has to stay within based on the revenue that they're generating. That's what exactly is going to happen right now, right? How is that organization? All that information is public knowledge.
For public companies.
If it's been in a consistent downturn, well, it's your right to ask questions about that, right?
And you can look at similar companies in their vertical too, right? If it's affecting one company in that space, it's probably going to at least be trending in the same direction with others.
Mm-hmm. I love companies that say, hey, check out our annual report. Here it is. Or the companies, this is even better. The companies that actually will take their annual report and they'll send it to their stakeholders and their stockholders and shareholders, but they also send it internally to every employee. Those companies I like to pay attention to, and they do it. It's a part of Chef's Kiss, the beautiful internal communication and employee engagement. So if you have a company that is very open in sending out their annual report, not just making it available, hey y'all, it's online, but they actually send the link and a copy of the report to employees, that's huge from my standpoint. What about, I know, Ron, you mentioned jobs with 200 applicants. What should candidates be looking for, I would say right now? So first of all, let's level set. We're recording this episode at the end of December 2022. And we know just throughout history and our experience that sometimes hiring slows down in December anyway. People are focused on the holidays. They're trying to be like me, making cakes for their neighbors. They're shopping, all of the above. So what should people look for as the new year starts, as we walk into 2023?
So I think people should, over the holidays, do some research, start to look at, well, as we've talked about before, what are those industries that are projected to do some hiring? Who are those that have been waiting in line to gain some of that talent, right? Mm-hmm. Start focusing on following them, following their job boards, set up your filters in LinkedIn that's going to get those things sent to you. The titles you want, the work situation you have or need, whether it be work from home, hybrid, on-site. I think people, and I've read, I spent quite a bit of time this week reading some of these articles and these conversations that people were having in relation to these articles about changing the mindset. We mentioned it in our last episode of how you look at your job requirements, right? What am I open to? I was reading some stats yesterday that were talking about the contractor landscape, right? And we've talked about how this kind of evolves in a market like this, but it shows that in January of 2021, 5.7% of tech listings were for contractors. In October of 2022, that's up 19.9%. It's almost tripled in that period of time. So you're going to see a lot more of that. Mm-hmm. I think people should prepare themselves for that. Now, with that, you have to look at what all is entailed with that, right? A lot of times when you work for the corporate side of as an employee, you're going to have different benefits, right? So you should take this time, do some research, see what your benefits costs are, so you know what is my ask, right? If I'm getting paid this now, and I was getting these benefits, if I go work with a contract, And let's say I don't have benefits. What's it going to cost me to get those? I need to know, and that's part of my asking price. Now, I know a lot of times with staffing companies, they provide benefits. They may be at different cost levels and things like that. So you just need to have yourself better prepared. One, in that mindset of being willing to do that. But two, what's my cost adjustment on it?
Generally, that's a 20% increase from what your base salary was, right? So what you want to look at is take it off of a 1920 scale. And what I mean by that is you generally work 1,920 hours annually.
Oh my
right?
gosh. Oh my gosh. It's a lot of hours.
But that's essentially what it is. So let's just say you were making, I don't know, 100K. Multiply that 100K by 1920, get your hourly rate, and increase it by 20%. That should be exactly where your benefits are covered. All these other different things that you had benefits through an organization would cover your, the other expenses that would be added on.
And you mean divide that by your 1920, right?
Yeah. And so here's the other thing you're going to look at is like generate your own LLC, establish your LLC, and then use it as a particular business, because then you have a lot more you could do with that, right?
Yeah, I want us to definitely talk about that in a future episode for budding entrepreneurs who, I don't like to use the term side hustle because, first of all, is it on the side, and are you hustling? And is hustling really a good thing after all? But yeah, I want us to be able to talk about LLC versus S corps versus C corps and how to set up, from a sole proprietorship, because there are benefits to all, but you need to determine what your business is, not your side hustle, what your business and what direction you want to go in. AJ, I have a question for you, because Ron mentioned for the candidate to look at the job requirement and see, that job posting, job description. I'm going to go to the flip side. So Jerron was talking about the candidate side. I'm going to come to you to talk about the organization side, because we know candidates are looking at job. What can the organizations do to be more proactive in how they screen in and screen? I say screen in. I don't necessarily like screen out. Screen in candidates for a particular job based on their job description, because we know some of those job descriptions are challenging. It's like, what'd you call it? A purple, Ron, what'd you call it? A purple
squirrel.
Purple squirrel. I like to just say a unicorn, because we know those people do not exist. And if they do, please, the only unicorn I've seen of late is one of those floaties in the front of someone's yard. So AJ, from your standpoint, what can organizations do to do a better job regarding their job requirements and job postings that people are responding to?
There's a few things. The first thing you're going to have to do is, one, understand the need. What exactly is it needed for? What are we doing? Who are the people that are key decision makers? Second thing, you're going to have to restructure the entire hiring process. Because what worked, hell, just a year ago isn't going to work right now.
Yeah.
Because there was such competition in the market for, just hiring people, that you had to create hiring strategies that would pushing out extreme levels of output, right? Like what you were having to go out and search for people, that's not the case right now. Now, with all the extremely talented people that are hitting your ATS, well, how do you figure out exactly who the organization wants?
Yeah.
That's the question that most organizations should be asking right now, and building out their talent acquisition strategies around that versus what they've been doing. I can't get into the specifics of what every organization's been doing, but now it's going to take a far more one-to-one approach, right? It's going to have to be very close ties with the specific hiring managers of these different groups, and understanding not only their needs, but understanding the organization's needs, not just throwing paper and saying, yes, we'll take them. It's going to have to be a complete restructure of their hiring process from a marketing standpoint, from a internal TA standpoint, from their onboarding standpoint. It's just going to have to be a complete restructure. And are the organizations taking those steps to do so? Right.
And I think that's a great point, right? Because what you're talking about is when we put together, prior to this job description, you wanted to cast a large net, right? I need to make it as broad as I can to try to get something into that net to start reviewing and looking at. Whereas now you need more filters, a smaller net, right? Because you're going to get so many people applying, and you need to be able to cut your time down to get through it. So the job descriptions are going to have to be more precise, more direct, more relevant to get you what you want. Otherwise, you're going to spend days and days going through resumes, and you may never get to that really, really best one because you just had so many. So,
well, that comes back to the internal organization understanding what the actual need is, right? It can't ever be like, I just need somebody to be able to do this and we're good.
Which has kind of been what it was before. But yes, absolutely. Now it's going to have to, like we talked about before, you have fewer recruiters to do this, and they got a lot more coming in front of them. They may have fewer jobs, but they're going to have way more applicants. So you got to find a way to help them out to get through to the best one, or what kind of a short-term outlook everybody's trying to get through right now. Yeah. And that's where we are.
Well, and that's where consultants come in for sure. So we know that organizations can lay off people, but we also, and I've seen this throughout my career, is that organizations can supplement those layoffs with consultants and freelancers. It happens all the time, so if you need someone, if you're organization A and you need to supplement your recruiting team or even your talent acquisition processes, and to look at that, there are people available, two people I'm talking to, that could come in and actually help revise it. And in all honesty, from my experience as well, it's often best that you get someone outside of your organization to come in and look at it, because they come in with, what I love to say from a marketing standpoint, is they come in with fresh eyes and a fresh perspective. They aren't tied to the business in the same way that your full-time employees are tied to it. So they may be listening to what other people are saying. Oh, we need to do this. And you're like, okay, groupthink, where an outside consultant can come in and say, we should do this. And a leader or someone saying, oh, no, we want to do that. And you're like, no, let me tell you why. You paid me to come in. Let me show you why this works best. I've been doing this for however many years, and best practices and all of the above. My last question to you both, especially since we're talking about layoffs, we're at the end of the year again. And I would say, no, we've said it before, no one likes to be laid off at all. So it can easily turn to a person to have a pessimistic feeling about moving forward. Like, oh, nothing's going to happen for me, so much that no one's hiring because this company laid off, this company has laid off. But what are your thoughts about how people should just kind of move that pessimism to the side? Y'all both said that companies are hiring, organizations are hiring, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how
this goes back to
yeah,
changing your mindset, number one, but look at this as an opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, you could look at this as, this is a very pessimistic thing. I can't believe this happened. It's like that knee-jerk reaction, right? Like, think about it the same way where you were turning in your resignation to your former employer. Same kind of thing happened, right? It just wasn't you on that end. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you need to look at this and say, okay, take a step back. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Mm-hmm. And how do I utilize both to start the next chapter of my particular evolution? You're going to have to look at this as an individualistic standpoint, because that's what's going to push you forward. Right.
Right.
And start looking at things very holistically. and being real with yourself, right? It's it's kind of looking at these things and saying, okay, this is a problem, but is it a problem for you or is it a problem for a greater number of people? And if it's a problem with a greater number of people, how do you stand out? Right. That's essentially what we've been talking about this entire time. But you're gonna have to change your mindset. The first thing you need to do is fix how you're thinking about this. Because let's just say you do want to go get another job or start your own business and all these other different things. When you go to an interview, your emotion seeps out, whether you think it doesn't or not. And you put out certain vibrations to the people that are talking to you that can clearly say that how badly this is impacting you. Are you taking this as an opportunistic view, or are you looking at it like, oh crap, I just need to go find another job?
Well, and I think, and some people they may have to look at that piece of it, right? You talk about, do I need to just go find another job? You've got, from a needs analysis standpoint, people have to pay their bills, right? And some of these people who have been out for a while, they may be getting more desperate. So you may just have to look at it as, I need to take this job. And on the surface, it doesn't look like my dream job, but it could turn into it. You never know what it can turn into.
Yeah.
You know exactly what it's going to turn into if you don't take it and you have the opportunity. But yes, you have to have a positive outlook, because you can smell the desperation, and you just have to surround yourself with positive influences, positive people, positive readings. I mean, I know even on LinkedIn, when all those massive layoffs are going out, it was just getting overwhelming reading those and depressing, right? So if that's what it does, don't read those. Look for the positives. Look for the people who are getting jobs. Read their stories. Reach out to them. Ask them, what did you do differently? People are in a very helping mode and mood right now. They feel for people. Hit your network. Just really reach out to your network, because and increase your network. People are like I said, way more willing to help than ever before, and help just come in the form of encouragement. You just have to surround it with encouraging people. I know some of the people we got laid off all of us at the same time, and actually one of them just got a job this week, which is fantastic, and I'm so happy for her. It was a very quick turnaround. And I also know one that got laid off 3 months ago recently just got a job. So, but that whole process was just, I remember speaking with that person, was just keeping the positivity up. Reach out to those who can help you stay in the glass half full. You can't get to the glass half empty piece.
True. I wrote just as a note that y'all know I tend to be pretty optimistic, probably to a fault. It can be annoying. But you actually partner optimism and realism, and then leave pessimism at the door.
Just one little tack onto that is, you can't let it stop you, because you may just, the time you're ready to give up, you may be that next one was going to be the one. And that's the way you have to look at it, right? This next application that I make, this next interview that I take, that may be the one. So you just always have to look at it that way.
It's just the same things that salespeople look at. That's why they go hard, because it's like, no, it may be the next one. I don't know. It may be the next
one more call. That's what I've always said.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you both.
Hope you guys have a wonderful holiday, and that everyone else out there does, and just take advantage of this downtime, enjoy family, friends, and be ready to attack 2023 with all the ammunition that you can.
Hey, AJ here. We know episode 2 is longer than you probably anticipated, but with good reason. We wanted to really dive into what's happening with layoffs right now and help you better prepare what's next. You're next. We're ready to help you through it, including those of you who are simply looking for a career change. Like, follow, and subscribe to Tip That Scale, as we help you tip that scale in your favor. Also, share this episode with a friend and give us a shout out on your socials. You don't want anyone to miss what's to come.